There was something a little odd about the way some of them were hanging, as if something heavy were lying on top of them. It was eerie. All she could see were shadows and light, green leaves and bright yellow bananas, but when she reached out, her claws brushed against dragon scales, and the indignant hiss that came from them told her she'd found what she was looking for. "Your Majesty?" Glory said, with a polite bow. "Very impressive camouflage," she added honestly. "Let's see what you can do," Magnificent grumbled, her scales shifting back to purple. They returned to the center of the arena as the Rain Wings all applauded. It took Glory a moment to realize they were applauding for her. She hoped that meant she had found the queen fairly quickly. Now she just had to hide even better than Magnificent had. Handsome stepped up to tie the blindfold around Magnificent's eyes. Glory let her scales shift into the greens of the vines below her. She didn't want anyone to see where she went, especially the other queens. Her first idea had been to go straight up and blend into the sky overhead, but to stay aloft, she would have had to keep her wings moving, and she was worried that Magnificent might feel the breeze. So instead, she headed for the tree Exquisite and Fruit Bat had been staring at. She swarmed up the side of it, feeling the shaggy moss squish below her talons. Her scales had changed instantly to the dark brown and yellowish green of the moss-covered tree. Once she thought she was high enough, she twisted around so she could see everything below her. Then she flattened herself against the trunk and concentrated, adding the shape of a tiny blue tree frog on her back for extra camouflage, which was a trick Mangrove had taught her. Down below, she heard Handsome tell Magnificent that she could start looking. The queen's eyes popped open, and she turned immediately to the other queens. Exquisite and Fruit Bat lifted their wings in befuddlement. Grandeur yawned coldly. Magnificent spun in a circle, peering at everything. She let out a small hiss of frustration, then gathered her wings. Suddenly, she bared her fangs and charged toward the edge of the circle where Sunny was standing. She wouldn't dare hurt my friends. But Glory felt herself flinch as Sunny jumped back. At the same moment, Silver leaped off Sunny's back with a yelp of alarm and bolted toward the tree where Glory was hiding. Magnificent saw where the sloth was going, shot past her, and slammed into the tree trunk, nearly jarring Glory loose. The queen scrambled up the tree so fast, she stepped on Glory's wings before realizing she'd found her. With a triumphant yell, she backed up and poked Glory in the snout. "Found you!" Magnificent crowed. Silver caught up and flung herself into Glory's arms, shivering. Glory swung onto a branch so she could hold the sloth to her chest and stroke its fur. "Did you think that was funny?" Glory asked Magnificent. "Scaring a harmless sloth like that?" From the murmurs and shocked expressions on the faces below them, she guessed this wasn't a very popular way to treat one of the Rainwing pets. "She'll survive," Magnificent said. "And here's the important part. I won." Glory looked down at Handsome with a sinking feeling. He spread his talons in a "what can I do" gesture. "The queen is correct," he said. "Magnificent wins this round." Chapter 32. "Oh, look," Magnificent said cheerfully, pointing to the glint of sunlight on wings flapping through the trees. "The fruit gatherers are coming back." She flew back to the center of the arboretum and snatched one of the nuts off the mahogany table. 2-1. "Wasn't that cheating?" Sunny called, as Glory glided back down to her team. Kinkajou had furious red stripes marching along her scales, and Jambu was back to blue-gray again. Glory wondered if her brother had more than 2 moods. "That was totally cheating," Tsunami shouted. "You can't let her get away with that. Boo! Hiss!" "Silence them," Magnificent said to Handsome with a frown. He spread his wings and cleared his throat. "Nothing in the rules forbids what the queen did," he announced. "She is the winner. Officially. If not in spirit." Magnificent glared at him while Mangrove and Dazzling swooped down from the trees. Glory was too dazed to chime in. The others might call it cheating, But as far as she was concerned, Magnificent had only found a trick to reveal Glory's hiding place, the same way Glory had used the Rainwing audience for clues. So Glory had really lost. She'd lost. She couldn't pay attention to the sorting and counting going on as Mangrove and Dazzling spilled fruits of all shapes and sizes across the greenery. Handsome picked each one up, muttered over it for a moment, and set it in a pile. If I were competing alone, it would be over by now, Glory realized. She would have lost the throne in a direct contest with Magnificent. If she won it now, it would be only because the other Rainwings made it happen. Tamarin, who didn't know her at all, Mangrove, and Kinkajou. If they could do it. Kinkajou's eyes were fixed on Mangrove's fruit pile. She fidgeted with her tail and counted along under her breath. Handsome examined the last fruit, a dark blue prickled ball that oozed bright green juice when he poked it. He nodded and placed it on Mangrove's pile. Kinkajou shot Glory a delighted look. 17-16, said Handsome. The winner is Mangrove. What? Shrilled Magnificent. She whipped around to glare at Dazzling, who had yellow speckles around her mouth and a trail of green splatters down her chest. You ate some of them? I know there were 19 there when I... She stopped abruptly. Sorry, Dazzling muttered. I thought 16 would be enough. Well, you thought wrong, Magnificent growled. Excuse me, said Handsome. Did you say there were 19 there? There was an awkward pause as the two queens glared at each other. Magnificent flicked her tail and looked down her nose at Handsome. Are you accusing me of something? She asked coldly. I am, Kinkajou blurted. You collected fruits and stashed them somewhere ahead of time. Ludicrous, said the queen. The red flickers along her wings vanished abruptly. And impossible to prove. It occurred to Glory that Magnificent might have chosen to be purple today so that no one would spot any shimmers of guilt in her scales. Clever, she thought, glancing down at her own. The yellow had faded a little, and small gray clouds were gathering around her shoulder blades and wingtips. Doesn't matter anyway, Dazzling pointed out to Kinkajou. You won. Kinkajou jabbed Glory with her tail, and Glory snapped back into focus. There was still a chance. Now they were tied, and there was one contest left. It matters if you're planning to cheat again, she said sharply. That won't be necessary. Wind rustled through the leaves as Grandeur slid majestically between Glory and Magnificent. Her bones creaked like ancient forests, and the silver cast of her scales made her look as if she were reflecting moonlight instead of sunlight. She wasn't like the other queens. In fact, she wasn't like any other dragon in the village. Glory thought Grandeur might be the only Rainwing who actually looked, moved, and sounded like a real queen. She arched her neck and peered down at Kinkajou. I can crush this little creature easily on my own. We'll see, Kinkajou said bravely, but anxious streaks of green flickered in her ruff. This is asking too much of her, Glory worried. Kinkajou was barely half Grandeur's size, with hardly any training. The Nightwings had been so underwhelmed by her venom that they hadn't even bothered binding her mouth. How could she possibly win? Handsome beckoned the two dragons into the center of the arboretum. Standard venom practice rules apply, he said. Take the utmost caution to hit no living creature. We'll be testing distance and targeting. Who'd like to go first? I, said Grandeur. She eyed Handsome and his two helpers as they rolled a long, polished plank of wood across the vines. It was as wide as 5 talon prints and 4 times as long, with small measurement marks all the way along it. One end stopped at Grandeur's front talons. She stretched her neck and jaw, while the Rainwings scurried out of the way, leaving the plank laid out in front of her like a welcoming carpet. Whenever you're... Handsome started. Grandure's mouth snapped open, and a spray of black venom shot out. The droplets spattered on the wood near the far end of the plank, sizzling and burning small holes where they fell. The watching dragons all oohed admiringly. I'm guessing that's pretty impressive, Glory said to Mangrove. His sigh answered her question. Grandeur stepped aside with a polite gesture at Kinkajou. The little dragonette stepped up nervously, opened her mouth as wide as she could, and shot a tiny jet of venom at the plank. It landed barely a quarter of the way between her claws and Grandure's drops. Glory's heart sank. Mangrove dropped his head into his front talons with a groan. Kinkajou turned to Glory with a heartbroken expression. There's still the targeting part, Jambu said hopefully. He patted the little dragonette on the back. The helpers were already dragging out a kind of easel, painted with 3 yellow and white circles. What if I fail? Kinkajou said to Glory. All those dragons. It'll be my fault if we never see them again. It'll be my fault that you're not queen. Stop that, Glory said, placing one talon over Kinkajou's. I lost my own contest, remember? It's my fault more than anyone's. But I will be queen one day. And in the meanwhile, she caught Mangrove's eye to make sure he was listening. We'll get Orchid and the other Rain Wings back, no matter what it takes. Maybe I won't have an army, but we'll make a rescue mission out of my friends and anyone else who's willing to go. So don't think about that right now. All I can ask is that you try your best. And I know I don't even have to ask, because you're the kind of dragon who always does. That's true, Kinkajou said. I am that kind of dragon. She squared her shoulders. I will. That's what I'm going to do. Glory glanced up and realized that Grandeur had been listening too. The old queen turned around and casually shot a spray of her venom at the painted board. It landed precisely in the center of the first circle. Magnificent gave Glory a triumphant smile. It would have been really nice to wipe that smile off her face. And one day, I will. I will be queen of this tribe. That's what I'm meant for. I'm sure of it. Kinkajou stepped up beside Grandeur, opened her mouth, and sprayed her venom at the circles. The drops splashed right on top of Grandeur's, and a hissing sound came from the board as the wood melted a little more. The older Rainwing made a sound of approval and patted Kinkajou's head. Then she tilted her head just a little and shot a black jet directly into the center of the second circle. Kinkajou took a deep breath and did the same. More sizzling and smoking came from the wood. Don't get excited, Glory told herself, although she couldn't help feeling impressed with Kinkajou. She knew for a fact that she wouldn't have been able to aim that precisely. But if the 2 dragons tied on this part of the challenge, Grandeur would still win because of the distance part. Practice a gracious in defeat face, and then get ready to study like life depends on it so I can try this again. I wonder how long I have to wait between challenges. Grandeur opened her mouth, and then a sloth tumbled out of the trees, landing in front of the board. Kinkajou leaped to shove it out of the way, and time seemed to slow down, so Glory could watch each drop of venom sail in an unhurried arc to land, splash, 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 right on Kinkajou's wing. Chapter 33. All around the arboretum, Rainwings started screaming. Kinkajou collapsed in a ball of scales that went instantly white with pain, except for the 3 spots where black venom was eating through her wing. Glory rushed to her side and found Grandeur opposite her, grabbing Kinkajou's talons. Grandeur's face was horrified. "Help her!" Glory yelled. She remembered what Jambu had told her about how a relative's venom would counteract your own. "Who's related to you? Get them over here!" "I don't know," Grandeur said hopelessly. "I haven't had any eggs in decades. I haven't tried matching venom with anyone in so long. I don't think there's anyone related to me anymore." "That's insane," Glory shouted. "Why can't you dragons keep track of these things? You must have had dragonets at some point, and they must have had dragonets too." "Maybe, but no one has—" Kinkajou shrieked, a high, wailing sound of agony. "Start trying," Glory cried. "Try everyone. Try me." She grabbed the easel and spat a messy puddle of venom on the corner. The wood hissed and melted, as if it were burning from the inside. Grandeur didn't hesitate. She sprayed her venom right on top of Glory's. And the melting stopped. Glory didn't have time for the shocked expression on Grandeur's face. She couldn't risk trying to aim neatly for the same 3 spots where Grandeur's venom had hit Kinkajou. She might end up causing far more damage. Quickly, she ripped 3 leaves off the vine below her, dipped them in the puddle of her own venom, and stuck them to Kinkajou's wounds. The sizzling sound faded, and the black acid stopped spreading. "You're all right. You're going to be all right," Glory said to Kinkajou, lifting the dragonette's head in her talons. She realized the little dragon had fainted. Also, Grandeur was staring at her, as if sloths were parading out of Glory's ears. "What?" Glory said. "So I'm your granddaughter, or great-grandniece or something. It's not like anyone around here really cares, right?" "I do," said Grandeur. "Because it means that you are descended from the original line of Rain-Wing queens, and so I am not the last one worthy of the throne after all." Glory blinked at her. "I didn't think anyone cared about royal blood here." "Nobody but me," said Grandeur. "We used to keep track of the royal eggs, but my daughters were useless, so we merged our eggs with the tribes, hoping to find successors who were queens in spirit, if not blood. There were a few who might have been great if they'd ever tried for the throne, but the truth is, I've never found a dragonette who both wanted to be queen and deserved to be. Until now." She stood up and faced Magnificent like an enormous storm cloud. "I forfeit. Kinkajou wins." "What?" Magnificent shrieked. "Did you hear that?" Glory said to Kinkajou. "You won." The dragonette's eyes fluttered open, and she managed a smile. "That is super cool," she whispered. Tamarin came up behind them and slid her wing under Kinkajou's head so Glory could stand up next to Grandeur. She felt dizzy with disbelief. "It's my throne anyway," Grandeur said to Magnificent. "I have merely tolerated all of you on it, because I thought experience might transform you into worthy queens." She shot a disgusted look at Dazzling, Exquisite, and Fruit Bat. "That theory turned out to be quite wrong." "You don't know anything about this dragon," Magnificent complained, pointing at Glory. "I know she'll be a better queen than you," said Grandeur. She turned to the assembled tribe with a sweeping gesture. "Behold, your new queen, Queen Glory of the Rain-Wings." And they cheered. Glory stepped back, dazzled, as what looked like the whole tribe rose into the air, beating their wings and singing out joyfully. The rainbow of different colors was swept away on a tide of sunflower gold excitement, and Glory thought to herself, "Wow. I'm a queen. Queen Glory of the Rain-Wings. That'll be my name in the history scrolls. Not Glory the Mistake, or Glory the Lazy Rainwing, or Glory who could never be as good as some nameless skywing who died 6 years ago. I'm responsible for all these dragons now. We can rescue the missing Rainwings and make sure no more dragonettes ever get lost again. Starflight can help me teach them all how to read and write. I'll protect them. I'll lead them. I'll make them..." Us. A tribe we can be proud of. Glory, the queen who chose her own destiny, saved her subjects, and turned her tribe into the greatest dragons in all of Pyria. "Speech!" Jambu demanded, barreling into her. His scales were a pink so vibrant it almost hurt her eyes to look at him. "Don't you start. Luckily, no one would hear me over all this noise," Glory said, with a wave at her jubilant subjects. She gave her brother an affectionate shove, and he wound his tail around hers for a moment, and she didn't even mind. As he bounded off to assault someone else's eyes, she felt movement at her wing and turned, thinking it was Kinkajou, but it was Sunny. Sunbeams danced on her gold scales as the little sandwing beamed at her. "You did it," she said. "Not by myself," said Glory. "I needed these dragons to make it happen." She spread her wings to encompass Jambu and Mangrove, but they were bouncing around in excitement. Tamarin was hugging Kinkajou, and even the wounded dragonette was pale pink with joy. "This is so unfair," Tsunami said, landing beside them. She sighed dramatically. "This was supposed to be my story. Stupid sea wings, already having a decent queen." "Maybe you'll still be the sea wing queen one day," Glory said, "and then I can give you tips on how to be majestic and brilliant." They grinned at each other. "This just proves what I've always said," Tsunami observed. "Who needs a prophecy to tell you how to make an awesome destiny?" "True," Glory said. "Take that, prophecy. You're not about me? Well, I'm not all about you either." Sunny fluttered her wings like a settling butterfly. "We still need you, though," she said. "You're still one of us, and no one will ever convince me otherwise." Glory brushed Sunny's wing with hers, feeling a warmth that wasn't coming from the sand wing's scales. "The first thing we have to do is rescue the rain wings from the Night Kingdom," she said, "which means turning these dragons into an army as fast as possible. Tsunami can help with that." "Yes, I can," Tsunami said, flexing her claws. "Well, actually," Sunny said, "I was thinking maybe there's another—" The sound of branches thrashing overhead made Glory spin around. Clay came barreling through the trees, trailing broken twigs and wrestling loops of vines out of his way. He stared around wildly at the rejoicing rain wings, spotted Glory, and crashed down in front of her. "Clay!" Sunny cried. "What is it? What's wrong?" Horrible images popped into Glory's head of her friends hurt, of a Nightwing army marching through the tunnel to invade the rainforest. "It's Starflight," Clay said. "He's disappeared." He shot an anxious look at Glory, and she remembered the argument she'd had with Starflight the last time she'd seen him. Surely he hadn't— "Glory, I'm sorry," said Clay, "but I think he's gone to warn the Nightwings." Epilogue. "I hate this place," Flame said, glowering at the dark rock dust caught between his claws. "Hate, hate, hate it." "I hate it more," Squid moaned. He coughed gloomily. "My scales feel so dry, my talons hurt, and I'm hungry." "I hate that big old stupid horrible Nightwing," Viper hissed. "I can't believe my dad let him take me." Squid edged to the mouth of the cave and stared at the smoky sky, as if hoping Nautilus would appear suddenly, winging to his rescue. "Oh, stop," Fate Speaker said, flicking her tail. "It's not that bad." Actually, it really was that bad, but she certainly wasn't going to admit it to these four. She had never, ever imagined that the Night Kingdom, her kingdom, would be so dark and smelly, and that all the dragons here would be so incredibly cranky. It was as if being the most awesome dragons in the world didn't even make them happy at all. But hey, she was home, and Marosier said she was part of a prophecy, which was even more awesome than being a Nightwing. So what was there to complain about, really? "I want to die," Ochre groaned, The mud-winged dragonette had been lying on the floor of the cave for practically the entire day since they'd been dumped here by Marosier. I want you to die too, Flame volunteered. You smell ghastly, Viper agreed. I don't think I should have eaten that dead thing, Ochre mumbled. He paused, then added, or all of your dead things. Well, I wasn't going to eat it, Squid said snootily. We are on an island. I think someone should be able to bring me a fresh fish, considering who my father is and the fact that I'm a dragonette of destiny. I mean, really. Fate Speaker shifted on her talons uncomfortably. She hadn't really liked the look of what the grumpy Nightwings had brought them to eat either. Why was everything so decayed and horrible smelling? Have a vision, she told herself. That'll make you feel better. She closed her eyes and scrunched up her forehead and concentrated as hard as she could. I foresee, she said in a portentous tone. No, shouted Viper. Spare us, Squid cried. Arr, Ochre moaned. Now I want you both to die, said Flame. Oh, shush, Fate Speaker said, with her eyes still closed. I'm using my powers. Behold, I foresee a walrus in our future, an entire walrus for us to eat. Why are you torturing me? Ochre wailed. We hardly ever had walrus even when we lived next to the sea, Squid pointed out. Despite the fact that you predicted we would just about every week, Viper added sourly. My visions are not always precise, Fate Speaker said breezily. It does not say when this walrus will arrive, only that it will, and then we shall feast, and everything will be wonderful again. When has it ever been wonderful before? Flame snarled. Do us a favor and stop sharing your stupid powers with us, Viper snapped. Grumpy, ungrateful lizards. Fate Speaker sat down in the mouth of the cave and turned up her snout, ignoring everyone. If they couldn't appreciate the gifts she bestowed upon them, well then fine. She would just keep her visions to herself. Until she had another great one anyway. The Night Kingdom volcano stretched below her, dark and craggy and swarming with black dragons. There weren't nearly as many Nightwings as she'd expected. It felt more like the Talons of Peace camp than a whole kingdom. But the dragonettes hadn't exactly been given a tour. They hadn't even been taken to the big fortress, which Fate Speaker assumed was where the queen lived. Nor had they been introduced to the Nightwing Queen. Or anyone, actually. Marosier had stuffed them in this high cave and stomped away again. Fate Speaker squinted down at the black sand beach in the distance. A cave was set into the cliff there, and earlier she'd seen several dragons swoop into it. Now they were coming out again, and they had a Nightwing dragonette in their talons. He looked about the same age as Fate Speaker, and he was unconscious. His wings drooped, and his claws dragged in the sand. Her scales began to tingle in that way that she was sure meant a sign from the universe. There was something important about that dragonette. I'm having another vision, she announced. The bones left over from Ogre's dinner splattered on the ledge beside her. She was lucky that Squid didn't have very good aim. I'm just letting you know that I'm not telling you about it, she said, even though I'm sure it's very significant. The others ignored her, which they did way too often. Well, it didn't matter. She was home with her own kind now. She had a destiny to follow. And she was sure the unconscious dragonette, who was now being carried into the fortress, would be part of it. The Dragonette Prophecy. When the war has lasted 20 years, the Dragonettes will come. When the land is soaked in blood and tears, the Dragonettes will come. Find the sea wing egg of deepest blue. Wings of night shall come to you. The largest egg in mountain high will give to you the wings of sky. For wings of earth, search through the mud for an egg the color of dragon blood. And hidden alone from the rival queens, the sandwing egg awaits unseen. Of 3 queens who blister and blaze and burn, 2 shall die, and 1 shall learn. If she bows to a fate that is stronger and higher, she'll have the power of wings of fire. 5 eggs to hatch on brightest night, 5 dragons born to end the fight. Darkness will rise to bring the light. The Dragonettes are coming. Prologue. The ice dragons came out of nowhere. It should have been a quiet night. They shouldn't have seen anyone but Skywings and other Mudwings on their patrol along the mountainous border between their kingdoms. There hadn't been a battle near their village since the one where they lost Crane, 16 days ago. Reed still couldn't think about that battle without feeling a huge pit open inside his chest. Sometimes he wanted to close his eyes and fall into that pit and never come out. But he couldn't. He had 4 other brothers and sisters who depended on him. He was their leader, their bigwings, even though he knew now that he wasn't supposed to be. It should have been their brother Clay, whose egg was stolen before they all hatched. "Did you hear that?" Umber whispered, darting up to fly beside him. The smallest dragon in their Mudwing troop of siblings, Umber was also the most observant. Reed knew by now that it was always worth listening to him. "What?" Reed whispered back, tilting his head and straining his ears. His wings caught the air currents as they both soared higher, and he studied the dark, jagged shapes of the claws of the Clouds Mountains. He couldn't see any movement or hear any wing beats. Still, he twisted around to check on his brothers and sisters, calling them closer with a flick of his tail. In a moment, Pheasant, Sora, and Marsh were flying in a close formation behind him. "I thought I heard hissing," Umber said, "somewhere close by." Reed glanced down uneasily at the shadowy trees that covered the mountain slope below them. Anything could be hiding in there. But the only sound he heard was the Sandwing General up ahead, calling it top volume, as if Stealth Patrol were only a funny name for what they were doing. "Move it, Mudwings!" bellowed the Sand Dragon. His squadron of 7 Sandwings, all fiercely loyal to Queen Byrne, hovered behind him, grunting. "I want to wrap up this patrol and get some sleep tonight." "It was probably nothing," Umber said to Reed. And that was when the 9 ice dragons suddenly shot out of the forest and attacked the Sandwings. It was so fast, so calculated, and swift and sudden that 2 Sandwings were sent spiraling toward the ground with shredded wings and blood pouring from their throats before Reed could even process that this was a real attack. Marsh shrieked with terror and grabbed Reed, nearly tumbling the big wings out of the sky. Marsh had never really recovered from their first battle, where he'd seen their sister Crane die in front of him. "I need to do something about that," Reed thought, "but not right now." "Marsh, keep it together," he shouted, pulling his wing free. "Come on, quick, we have to help." He saw the hesitation on all their faces and caught himself wondering, again, what Clay would have done in this situation, and whether the others would have been happier and safer following him, and also wondering whether they were wondering that too. But no one said what they must be thinking. "It's a suicide mission. What help can we be? I don't want to lose another sibling." Instead, they formed up behind him and dove toward the writhing dragons. Reed hated fighting Ice Wings. Their serrated claws seemed 10 times sharper than normal claws, and their whip-thin tails left stinging marks across his snout and wings. Worst of all, they could just breathe on you and kill you. He shot a burst of fire at the biggest Icewing, who was grappling with the Sandwing general. Her teeth snapped shut, and she hissed at him, but she was too busy with the Sandwing to come after Reed. He spun in the air, lashing out at silvery white scales as another Icewing attacked his flank. They clutched each other with fierce talons for a moment, the wind buffeting their wings. Finally, Reed managed to cough out another bolt of flames, and the Icewing jerked away, narrowly avoiding a singed nose. Reed spotted an Icewing diving toward Umber and leaped to knock his brother aside, catching the brunt of the white dragon's momentum against his chest. As he staggered back, he saw another Icewing wrap her dangerous claws around Sora's neck, and he roared with fury. Pheasant was there in an instant, throwing the Icewing off Sora, but the ice dragon came back at them with her mouth open to shoot her frost breath. I can't lose anyone else, Reed thought. It'll kill me. He smashed into the Icewing's side and sliced his claws across her throat while she was twisting to breathe on him. Her eyes went wide, and she made an agonized, gargling noise as blood bubbled from the wounds. When he let go of her, the Icewing soldier fell toward the dark forest, her wings twitching feebly like a dying grasshopper. Retreat! A voice suddenly howled. Reed's heart jumped hopefully, thinking the Icewings were giving up. But then he realized it was the Sandwing general. Retreat! The sand dragon yelled again. Reed thought they might defeat the Icewings if they kept fighting, but it wasn't worth the risk. Every moment was another opportunity for an Icewing to kill one of his brothers or sisters. Retreating meant keeping them alive. Retreat! He echoed the general, grabbing Umber and pulling him back. Fall back! Pheasant, you too! He scanned the struggling shapes in the moonlight and picked out his troop, all still alive. For now. His sister sank her teeth into her opponent's forearm, and he released her with a shriek of pain. In a flash, she was at Reed's side, and they soared up into the sky with Marsh, Sora, and Umber right beside them. Reed saw the Sandwings take off toward the mountains. Most of the Icewings shot after them. Only 2 turned to pursue him and his siblings. This way! He cried, diving for the forest. If Icewings could hide in there, so could his dragons. He wasn't obligated to follow the Sandwings. They'd probably make a run for the Sky Palace anyway. And he didn't want to lead the Icewings back to his village. Pine branches whipped against his face as he hit the trees. His brothers and sisters had practiced a formation like this, zipping through an overgrown forest while staying together. He had to trust that they'd remember and be close behind him. He heard the sound of thrashing wings farther back and risked a glance over his shoulder. Even in the shadows, he recognized the shape of how his brothers and sisters flew. They were all there. It must be the Icewings who'd gotten caught in the upper branches. Reed took a chance and landed. The others dropped to the ground with him, and they all immediately flattened themselves with wings outstretched, becoming puddles of shadow on the dark forest floor. Silence fell. No one breathed. The branches creaked overhead, and small night animals skittered through the bushes around them. Reed felt a squirrel dart over his foot, but he didn't move a muscle. After a long while, they heard a faraway whistle and the sound of wings in the distance, as if the Icewings had reassembled to fly away. Reed still didn't move. He waited for almost an hour, until he couldn't hold his breath any longer, until any and all dragon noises had faded long ago. Then, very carefully and quietly, he inhaled. He heard the others do the same. Is anyone hurt? Reed asked softly. That was awful, Marsh whispered. I thought we were all going to die. I'm fine, Pheasant said. Nothing that won't heal soon. I'm all right, too, Sora said hoarsely. Umber? Reed said, when the smallest dragonette didn't respond. I hate this war, Umber burst out. I don't understand what we're even fighting for. Who cares who the Sandwing Queen is? I've never met Burn, and I don't want to. Why am I fighting an Icewing over a throne that has nothing to do with either of us? Because our queen says we have to, Pheasant said, with a little more sarcasm than Reed thought was safe, even if there was no one to overhear.
Queen Moorhen must have a good reason for allying with Byrne and the Skywings, Reed said. We shouldn't doubt her.
Besides, the war will be over soon, Sora said unexpectedly. She hardly ever spoke, and she'd spoken even less since Crane's death. Reed turned and saw her eyes reflecting the glow of the moonlight. Clay is going to end it. There was something about the way she said Clay's name that made Reed want to sink into a mud puddle and stay there for a month. She sounded as if she believed in him so much. A dragon they'd barely met. They followed Reed, and they loved him. He knew that. But surely they must wonder what could have been, and whether Crane might still be alive if Clay were their big wings all along. That's true, Umber said, lifting his head. Clay and his friends, they're going to save us soon.
How soon? Marsh asked. I thought the prophecy said 20 years. Doesn't that mean 2 more years before they end the war?
Actually, Pheasant said, some dragons think it depends on when you start counting. If you count from the first battle, then it's only been 18 years. But if you go back to the death of Queen Oasis, which is really when this whole thing started, then it's been almost 20. She caught the tilt of Reed's head and shrugged. I've been reading about the prophecy since we realized Clay is in it. There was a pause, as they all had their own thoughts about Clay, the war, and the prophecy.
If you're all unhappy, Reed said tentatively, we could try to find the talents of peace.
Pheasant let out a shocked hiss. I may not like this war, but that doesn't mean we should leave our tribe and our home. We're Mudwings. We belong in our village.
Unless you think we should leave, Marsh said, leaning against Reed's side. I'll do whatever you decide.
We all will, Umber said. Reed knew they would. But should they? He had no idea what to do. Betray his tribe, or keep risking his siblings' lives. You don't have to decide tonight, Pheasant said, more gently. We just had a narrow escape. Let's go home and sleep. We'll all feel better in the morning. Reed nodded, and they gathered themselves, stretching their cramped wings as best they could under the trees. Showers of pine needles slid across their scales, smelling of winter fires.
What were those ice wings doing here anyway? Marsh asked, stamping his feet. I have no idea, Reed said. It seemed as though they were lying in wait for us. But it's not like we're an important patrol. Perhaps they were here for something else, and we were unlucky enough to attract their attention.
Maybe they were here for the scavenger den, Umber said.
What scavenger den?
Reed glanced at him, surprised. Can't you smell it? Umber asked. We flew over part of it too. It's pretty well hidden in the forest. How do you notice something like that in the middle of a frantic escape? Pheasant demanded. Umber shrugged. Why would the Ice Wings care about a scavenger den? Sora asked softly. They all thought for a moment, then looked at Reed.
I don't know,
he said helplessly. It felt like he was saying that all the time these days. Well, Pheasant said, spreading her wings. It doesn't matter. What matters is we survived another battle, thanks to Reed.
I wonder if they really feel that way, he thought. I certainly don't. I hope we survive the next one, Marsh said gloomily.
I hope we don't have to, Umber said. I hope Clay fulfills the prophecy and ends the war and saves the world really soon, before we have to do any more fighting. Don't you think? Maybe he will? Maybe, Pheasant said. I hope so.
I do too,
Reed said. He looked up at the stars.
Before the war takes anyone else I care about, before our village is destroyed, before I have to choose between loyalty to my tribe and the safety of my brothers and sisters, before we have to kill anyone else. I hope so too.
Part 1. The Secret Plan.
Chapter 1. Where is she? Starflight suspected that he might be dead, except that everything hurt so much. Darkness pressed against his eyes whenever he tried to open them. His nose and throat ached in a fierce, raw way, as if they'd been scraped out with a crocodile tail. Is she all right? He couldn't remember what he'd dreamed and what was real. Perhaps he was still under the mountain. Perhaps his friends had never tried to escape their guardians. Maybe this was one long nightmare that had started with the threat of Marosir's visit. But Starflight was sure he could remember the large Nightwing taking him aside. There was a lecture about how Nightwings have a reputation to uphold, and Nightwings are natural leaders, and you must make the others respect you, fear you, and follow you, or you'll be the greatest disappointment our tribe has ever produced. Starflight couldn't have conjured that from his own brain. That was all real. He curled onto his side and felt jagged rocks press into his scales. Was the Skywing Palace real? The dragonettes captured before even tasting sunlight? The prison on the Tower of Rock? The baking hot arena sands that smelled of blood and terror? Queen Scarlet's delight at capturing him, a real Nightwing out in the world, and her plans to make him fight, and her excitement about the prospect of watching him die. No, that had to be real, because Starflight remembered being rescued by the Nightwings. He remembered watching his friends turn into small dots below him, blue and brown and bright, and he knew it was real, because it felt so much like this felt, as if he were a scroll ripped in half down the middle, so none of the words made any sense anymore. Will I ever see her again? I hope she's not here. I hope she's safe somewhere.
I think there's something wrong with him.
Was that a voice? He tried to listen, but his dreams dragged him back down. There had been another stern lecture from Marosir. It was essential for Starflight to be the leader of the dragonettes. Everything depended on him. And a new order. He must convince the others to choose Blister as the next Sandwing Queen.
Maybe they killed him by accident. That'd be all right. Maybe I'll get to be in the prophecy instead.
I don't think that's how it works, Fierce Teeth. And then there was the Kingdom of the Sea. No one would listen to him. He couldn't lead anyone. His friends practically laughed at him when he tried to support Blister. Another prison. Another escape where Starflight did just about nothing to help. And then the rainforest, and the strange, unnatural tunnels, one to the Kingdom of Sand, and one, apparently, to the secret home of the Nightwings. That Starflight remembered. He remembered staring up at it, the dark hole in the tree that led to a home he'd never seen.
I bet he'd wake up if I bit him.
I bet Marosir would throw you in the volcano if he found tooth marks on his prophecy pet.
I bet my mum would have him for lunch if he tried.
He was definitely hearing voices, unfamiliar voices very close by. The memory of the rainforest was blurring. Starflight tried to fix his mind on it, on those last moments, guarding the tunnel so the Nightwings wouldn't come through and attack the Rainwings. What had happened?
Well, he'd better wake up and be interesting soon, or Marosir will take him away again before we get to ask him anything. Ooh, I have an idea.
Claws scrabbled on rock, and then there was quiet. Starflight's eyelids felt too heavy to open, as if extra scales were piled on top of them. He let the darkness drift up over him again. Right. Guarding the hole. With clay. Morning sunbeams flickering through the green leaves, octopus blue flowers turning their heads up to the light. Sunny was back in the village, with Tsunami, watching Glory try to become queen of the Rainwings, of all things. Sunny had brought them food the night before, her golden scales brushing against his dark wings as she passed him strange little purple fruits. I love you, he would never say. Don't hate me because of what the other Nightwings have done. Don't think I'm like my tribe. Don't listen to Glory's description of my kingdom, the smoke and the fire, and the smell and the death, and the trapped, tortured Rainwings, and the cruel black dragons. Don't look at me like I'm one of them, like I could ever do what they've done. Please.
And then she'd glanced up at him and smiled, and in Sunny's eyes, he could see himself as Starflight, just fine the way he was. Her friend. Which made everything better and worse all at the same time.
Careful. I'm not going back for more if you spill it, idiot.
Get your great honking wings out of my way then, fathead. The voices again. Starflight caught at the memories, trying to remember the last thing that had happened before everything went dark. He'd been staring at the hole, wondering what the other Nightwings were really like, wondering if they were all as scary as Morrowseer, wondering if he went through and talked to them, whether they would listen. What if he could stop the Nightwings and Rainwings from fighting? What if his tribe understood him and believed in him? What if they thought it was better to be smart than brave? What if they didn't care that he had no special Nightwing powers? What would Sunny think of me then? She'd probably think, who are you, and what have you done with Starflight? Because there was no way he'd ever be brave enough to go through that tunnel on his own. And then Clay had yelped, "Did you see that? I think it was a boar. I'll be right back." And poor ever-hungry Clay had charged off into the trees, leaving Starflight to watch the hole alone. In a heartbeat, dark wings had boiled out of the hole. Dark claws had circled his snout. A dark voice had hissed in his ear. "Silence, if you want your friend to live." Another dark voice. "Better safe than sorry." Although he hadn't made a sound, and he'd known it would hurt right before the blow struck his head and pain blazed through him, and that was the last thing he... Splash! Starflight jolted up with a yell. His eyes popped open. Freezing salt water cascaded over his snout and snaked down his neck, seeping into his scales. The muddled, heavy feeling vanished in an instant. "It worked!" cheered one of the unfamiliar voices. "Drat," said another. "I really thought he was dead." Starflight shook his head and the pain ricocheted around inside. He rubbed at his snout, trying to clear the ocean water from his stinging eyes. 6 or 7 or maybe 8 dark blurry shapes surrounded him. Beyond them, glowing red light pulsed in lines along the walls. The freezing water had cleared his nose for a moment, but heavy smoky air was already pressing back in. "Who are you?" Starflight gasped, or tried to. "Huh. I thought he might attack us," said a third voice. "That's what I would do." "He doesn't look very dangerous," said another voice skeptically. "They should have picked someone bigger, don't you think? Bigger and scarier and fiercer." "Like me," said the voice, who had hoped Starflight was dead. "You all have tiny rain-wing brains," said yet another voice. Starflight was losing count. "He was still inside his egg when they took him. They didn't know if he'd be big or scary or even if he'd be male or female. Otherwise, of course, they would have picked a girl, obviously." "Like me." "Hello?" Starflight coughed. "Hello?" One of the shapes came close enough for him to make out the features of a disgruntled-looking dragonette a year or two older than himself. She poked at his mouth and peered at his teeth, jabbed at his chest so he coughed again, inspected his claws, and sighed huffily. "Weak," she declared. "I'd have sent him back too." "You're just saying that because you're hoping they'll pick you instead," said another dragonette, pushing forward. He patted Starflight's head in an almost friendly way. "But prophecies don't work like that." "We'll see," she muttered. "That's Fierce Teeth," said the friendlier dragonette to Starflight. "Don't mind her. Older sisters always think they can do whatever you're doing better than you can. I know, I've got one too. I'm Mighty Claws, by the way." "Older sister?" Starflight echoed, blinking at Fierce Teeth. "Yes. This is the touching family reunion part," she said. "Same mother, different fathers, we assume. How do you feel?" She eyed him from horns to tail. "Ill? Very ill? Dying, perhaps?"
What part of Brightest Night are you having trouble with? Said another dragonette behind Fierce Teeth. Haven't you been listening in class? Events have to match the prophecies. Hi, strange dragon, I'm Mind Reader, but don't worry, I promise I'll stay out of your head. The older dragonettes in the room laughed uproariously, as if this was the most hilarious joke in Pyrea history. The 3 dragonettes who looked younger than Starflight rolled their eyes, like they were used to hearing jokes that made no sense from that group. Starflight rubbed his wet scales, confused. Now that his sight was clearing, he could see that he was in a long, narrow cave lined with indentations in the rock at regular intervals, all the right size for dragonette beds. He was curled on one of these, not far from a large archway that seemed to be the only exit from the room. Next to him on the floor was a large hollow stone, which was apparently what the dragonettes had used to collect the seawater they'd just poured all over him. It didn't look like a prison. It looked like a dormitory. Hot coals smoldered in alcoves in the walls, lending a red glow to the room. A skylight at each end of the cave allowed a bit of dim gray light to filter in. There were at least 50 sleeping spots that Starflight could see, but only about 11 of them looked. It didn't look like a